Today, we are doing a live Q&A where you can ask me absolutely anything about becoming a freight broker or freight agent. So without further ado, let's jump in. Question from Alan. Explain freight broker and freight agent, the differences. All right, so really good question. A freight broker is a licensed entity by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration that allows them to broker freights. They are an intermediary between shippers, people that are making, producing, and shipping goods, manufacturers, distributors, people of that nature, and carriers, motor carriers, which are asset-based carriers that actually have the trucks and do the hauling. So they are a middleman between shippers and carriers, and they are licensed by the FMCSA. They have a freight broker bond. That's the basic fundamentals of what a freight broker is, okay? So they manage and connect the shippers, and they're able to make a margin. So for example, if a shipper pays them, just for easy math, $1,000 to move a load from point A to point B, they might pay a carrier $850 for that lane, and then they would profit $150 on that transaction. That's a perfect example of what a freight broker does. Now, a freight agent is not required to have a license, not required to have a bond, okay? And they're independent contractors, 1099 independent contractors that work under a licensed freight broker, okay? So licensed freight broker, then we've got the freight agent that works under them as an independent contractor. And what they do is they have their own customers, they move and manage all their own freight, and they are paid a 50 to 70% commission on any of the profit that's generated from their customers and the loads that they originate and manage. So just again, for easy math, let's say you're paying a shipper's paying you $1,000 for the load, and let's say you're paying a carrier $900 for that load, right? Just for easy math, there's $100 profit. That would mean the agent would get 50 to 70% of that $100, which would be $50 to $70 on that one load, okay? So if it was $200, then it'd be $100 to $140 on that load. So an agent works under a licensed broker, but a licensed broker is required to go through the FMCSA process. They need to apply for their authority. They need to get their bond. So there's some basic check boxes they have to have, but that's the dynamics between a freight broker and a freight agent. So I hope that makes sense. Another good question. Jabrell asks, does your business name have to have freight or logistics in it? No, it's not required by any stretch, but there are theories and strategies behind including the service that you provide in your business name. Now, there are plenty of businesses out there like Google and Airbnb and Coca-Cola, right? There's all kinds of business names out there that do not specifically describe what the business does, okay? But I will tell you that as a startup, it is a lot easier, in my personal opinion, to create awareness and to explain what you're doing to a business, for a business, or the service that you provide or the value that you can provide by having the service somehow associated with your name, okay? So you have companies like Total Quality Logistics, probably not one that you guys are really excited about, but it's a perfect example. But then you have on the other side of the coin, you have C.H. Robinson, right? So there are different theories on that. It is absolutely not required for you to have logistics, trucking, or transportation in your company name or freight in your company name, but there may or may not be some advantages to it. I prefer, when I name a business, just in my general business practices, I think I've had over 10 businesses in my career. Many of them failed. A small handful of them we've been fortunate to have some success with. But in most cases, I put the service or product or something that gives people a description of what I do simply by having the business name, but it's not required. Hope that helps. That was a long answer, but I wanted to try to give you some nuance in there, okay? Question from Greg. I already own a trucking company. How hard is it to add brokerage with my trucking business? Well, it's no harder for you than it is for a new broker. It's probably easier, but the process is the same, right? So you're still going to have to go to the FMCSA. You're still going to have to apply for your authority, your broker authority. You're still going to have to get a bond. You're still going to have to, have a BOC3. You're still going to have some of the basic fundamentals that a brand new broker who has no trucking experience or doesn't have a trucking company has. So it's pretty much the same, but it's not very complicated. The advantage you will have is that You already understand the lingo, right? You already understand what drives the trucking industry. And if you own a trucking company, who knows better what it takes to pick up and deliver a load on time in good condition with no problems, other than a truck driver or the owner of a trucking company, right? So those are some of your advantages, plus the network that you have of other carriers, plus the network and relationships you have with existing shippers. There's a lot of advantages to carriers starting a brokerage. For example, carriers, let's say you have 6 trucks. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out if you got 6 trucks and 6 drivers, you can only be hauling 6 loads at a time, which seems great. But the reality is, if all 6 of your trucks are loaded and your shipper has loads for you that they need picked up today, what are you going to do? You're not going to go out and buy another truck. That's where brokerage can come in, where you can now start generating revenue above and beyond the capacity of your own equipment. And I'm sure that's probably what you're thinking about, Greg. And I think that's a really great idea. So I hope that helps. It's pretty simple. It's not very complicated. If you guys need help with getting set up as a broker or a freight agent, or learning the steps on how to do that, or the A to Z for Freight Broker Startup, you guys can check out my Freight Broker Bootcamp Startup program. Again, trained over 10,000 students in that program, had that program for over a decade. We're well known to be the most cost-effective and comprehensive online freight broker and freight agent training program. So you can check that out there. Good question, Greg. Thank you. Jason says, what if a motor carrier breaks down in transit? How does the shipment get to the destination and who gets paid? Okay, so let's say, for example, a shipper gives me a load. I'm a broker. I then broker that load to a carrier. That carrier picks up the load, and during transit, the truck breaks down. It happens. So what happens at that point is, if that truck breaks down and that carrier is not able to deliver that load, okay, and finish the job, well, they're not going to get paid for that load. What you will do is you will hire another carrier to come in and pick up that load mid-transit. So they may have to transload that. They may have to cross-dock that load from one truck to the other truck that you're hiring. But ultimately, what ends up happening is, if the load breaks down in transit, you as the broker are still responsible for getting the freight to the final destination in good condition, right? So what you'll do is you'll hire a second carrier to go pick up the load wherever the truck is broken down. Hopefully you're able to cross-dock it, meaning move it from one trailer of the broken down carrier into the other trailer of the new carrier. And then that new carrier is going to take the product the rest of the way and deliver it, hopefully on time. If not, obviously you'd be communicating with your shipper to let them know what's happening and how you're fixing the problem. So I hope that helps. Question from Matt. If my goal is to be an independent freight agent and I have zero experience, should I work for a big box licensed broker like TQL to learn more about the business before going about it? The answer is no, but let me explain why. You would not want to go to work for a company like TQL to learn the business. And the primary reason why is because they require non-compete, non-circumvent, no back solicitation type clauses in their employment agreement, which would preclude you or prevent you from becoming a freight broker for probably at least 1 to 2 years after you were to quit or be terminated from TQL. So the hard part about going to work for a big box brokerage is that while you can gain some experience, the biggest problem you're going to have is the non-competes, non-circumvents, and no back solicitation clauses. And I know there's some rulings out there and some court cases going on right now related to non-competes. Who knows where that's going to fall? But ultimately, even if a company like TQL or CH Robinson or these big box brokers can't have a non-compete, what they will be able to have is they will be able to have a no back solicitation, no back circumvent, and having a non-disclosure type agreement where you would not be able to contact the customers or the shippers that you did business with. Now, you would still learn a lot in that type of role, but you would not be able to translate those customers or carriers into your future business, because that would be protected by a no back solicitation clause. So while I like the idea of going to work for a brokerage to learn some of the inside components of that brokerage, the challenge is having a non-compete or non-circumvent or no back solicitation, right? So I think truly, whether you have experience or not, it's something that you can learn very quickly. But I like your thought process on becoming an agent first, right? Don't believe the hype. You do not need a book of business, and you do not need an extensive amount of experience in order to become an independent freight agent. What you need to do is you need to understand who's the value you can provide it to, which is typically small to medium-sized brokers. And then you need to give them the value proposition if you're willing to work on straight commission, maybe starting out at 50% commission on the loads. And then from there, you just got to prove yourself, go out and get some business, learn how to manage and source and cover that business. And you can start to grow an agency very quickly. I mean, again, the nice thing about the agent business is you don't have to become a licensed freight broker. You don't need a bond. You don't need a BOC3. You don't need insurance. You don't need any of those things as a freight agent because you operate under the license of a freight broker. So I hope that helps. Good question. Question from Mike. Is it best to start your broker business as a side hustle first and grow from there? Or is the amount of work, make it full-time job, make it your main job? Okay, so here's what I tell everybody. You can start a freight brokerage part-time, but you can't start a freight brokerage in your spare time. Now, let me explain to you what I mean by that. If you want to start your business part-time, let's say you're a truck driver and you're driving over the road and you want to get your freight broker authority and you want to start getting shippers and moving freight. You can do that as a truck driver doing it part-time. But what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to commit to some sort of a schedule or a commitment that you're going to be doing this at least part-time. And for me, part-time is something where you're going to be doing it at least 15 or 20 hours a week minimum. Okay. It's not something where you're going to be able to go in and work an hour here and an hour there and an hour here and an hour there. You're just not going to be able to build the momentum. You're not going to be able to build the synergies that you need. You're not going to be able to fill your sales funnel. You're not going to be able to develop those relationships. You're not going to be able to move the freight effectively. So you can do it in part-time, but you can't do it in your spare time. Matter of fact, I just talked with one of my past students. He explained to me how he has a full-time job. He works evenings. Like I think he works in like the maybe 5 p.m. until like late at night. And he's been working that full-time job while he started his freight brokerage. And he gets up in the morning, maybe from like 8 to 12 or 8 to 1, and he works his freight brokerage. And he's making more money right now part-time as a freight broker, right? While he's still working than he does in his full-time job. Okay. So he's going to be making that transition very, very soon. So it can be done. Is it harder? Yes. Is it safer? Probably. So I hope that helps. Steve Parker asks, how do we fill the RFQs, like 500 lanes? I fill an RFQ, but I didn't get any lanes from them. Okay, so Steve, I don't know your background and I don't know who the customer is, but here's what I'm going to tell you first of all. In most cases, if you are a newer broker, you should not be focusing on large enterprise Fortune 1000 brands or shippers. My personal opinion is your value as a new small broker is much more beneficial to small to medium-sized shippers. Shippers that are maybe doing 5 million to 100 million in revenue. Now that 100 million may seem like a big business, but in reality, it's still a pretty small company, okay? So I would focus on the small to medium-sized shippers. Now, most of those shippers are not gonna have huge bid packages, okay? Number one. So I believe part one of my answer is focus on small to medium-sized shippers, not volume shippers, okay? Everybody thinks the money is in volume shippers. The problem with volume shippers is there's a lot more competition there. Okay. There is a lot more vetting process. The sales cycle is longer, right? It's an uphill battle where if you focus on small to medium sized shippers, the barrier to entry and the friction to start getting customers is much, much less. Okay. So that's part A. Part B, if you do run into a bid package where they have 500 lanes, it doesn't mean that you have to try to compete on all 500 lanes. Okay. So I was always a big believer in, and I am a huge believer in, riches are in niches. Now let's assume the shipper is in your niche, right? So let's say you're in the flatbed niche, right? You're doing Northeast outbound flatbed. I'm just giving you an example, right? Because that was one of the niches that we pursued. So if it picked up in New York or PA or New Jersey up through the Northeast, and it was on a flatbed and it was going west or south, what I would focus in on would be the lanes and the equipment type that fits into my niche. Now, if there are lanes that I see where there's not a lot of good capacity, right? Where I think it's going to be very challenging to try to cover that freight, I may or may not compete on that. Obviously, the rates would vary. But here's the thing about big bid packages. Don't feel the need to do all the lanes in the bid package. Focus. I think you're better off spending your time and sharpening your pencil and honing your pricing in on some of the lanes that fit more into your specific niche or wheelhouse and getting a starting point with that shipper. Now, granted, if you're not in it, you can't win it. But these bid packages, these large RFQ bid packages take a lot of time if you're doing the proper research. So that's there is some risk versus reward there. And there is an investment in time. So you want to make sure you're spending your time wisely. I hope some of those tips help, Steve. Danny Garcia asks, not in the business now, but have been interested in the industry for years. I would like to start ASAP. What route do you recommend? I would like to start my own business eventually. Okay. So Danny, if you don't have any experience in freight, trucking, or logistics, if you don't have a background in that, like I did not have a background in that when I first got started, I highly recommend you start as a freight agent. Right? I talked about that at the beginning. That was the first question. A freight agent is an independent contractor, 1099 contractor that works on straight commission, typically somewhere between 50 and 70%. And they work on that commission and they work under a licensed freight agent. The reason why I suggest you start there is because number one, there's less risk, there's less cost investment. You don't need to know as much. The job is much easier. And if you can't make money as a freight agent, you are really truly going to struggle in making money as a freight broker because there's a few more balls that you have to juggle as a freight broker than as a freight agent. So I hope that helps. And where I would send you is pretty obvious. Go to freightbrokerbootcamp.com, trained over 10,000 students, had that program for over a decade. Again, we offer a 60-day, 100% unconditional money back guarantee. If you're not happy for any reason after 60 days, just send us an email and we'll refund 100% of your purchase price. You have zero risk with the Freight Broker Bootcamp Startup Program. Okay, Brian Neal asks, it seems like the industry is highly saturated. Does that mean rejection and hangups are very high, meaning lots of work to be successful? Okay, so just so you know, and I'm going to be very upfront with you, every industry is very competitive. The internet has leveled the playing field for almost every single industry. I don't care if you're in the insurance industry or you're in the real estate industry or if you have a pizza shop. I don't care what business you're in, it's competitive, okay? The internet has done that and they've evened the playing fields. Used to be big businesses had a huge advantage over small businesses, but now that gap has been bridged where small businesses, startups can compete with large businesses. Why? Because of the availability of data, information, and reach. Okay. So first, I'll start with that. So it's even the playing fields. Yes, there is competition in the freight industry. There's always been competition in the freight industry. Okay. There's hundreds of thousands of trucking companies, and there's probably, 20 or 25,000 licensed freight brokers in the United States. But the fact is, year over year over year over year, decade over decade over decade over decade, non-asset-based logistics and freight brokers control more freight now than they did last year, than they did the 5 years before. So the trend for shippers is they're moving towards non-asset-based logistics companies. More of them are using brokers today than ever. Any industry that you get in is going to have rejection when you're doing cold outreach, cold calls, or cold emails, or face-to-face. Yes, you're going to have some rejection. It's an absolute positive fact that that's going to happen. But the fact of the matter is, here's the greatest part about becoming a freight broker or freight agent. Unlike the real estate industry, unlike owning a pizza shop, unlike the insurance business or the car business, you do not need hundreds or thousands of customers in order to make an incredible living. The fact is, most freight brokers that have between 5 and 10 active shippers that are shipping with them, even if they're small to medium-sized shippers, are generating a 6-figure income and profit after all of their expenses. So you do not need a large customer base because of the nature of the freight business, which is repeat business, right? So if you get a lane, say you have a very small shipper and you're moving a lane from point A to point B, and you're doing that once a week, and you're only making $200 per load that you're moving per week, right? So you're making $200 times 52 weeks. That's over $10,000 a year in profit for just one small shipper. So if you had 10 of those, that's over 100 grand. And that's one load a week is a very, very small shipper. It's not uncommon with average shippers where you're moving a load every day, or you're moving 10 loads a day. Now that would be a larger shipper, but if you're imagine moving 20 loads a month at $200 profit. That's $4,000 a month. That's almost $50,000 a year from just one small shipper. So the cool part is the retention and the recurring nature and the lifetime value of a shipper is very, very high compared to a pizza shop, compared to selling a car to somebody once every 6 years or 5 years, right? So that's some of the advantages, but yes, there will be challenges. So that's a big reason why I created the Freight Broker Sales Accelerator. So this is a perfect time to kind of share that. So the Freight Broker Sales Accelerator, the hardest part that most people have is not getting started and get their business up and running. It's getting their first 5 or 10 shippers and doing their first $1 million in revenue. So I put together what I call the Freight Broker Sales Accelerator. That's a program, Freight Broker Sales Coaching Program, where I take that piece of my brain, I transplant it into your head with my best freight broker sales strategies, tactics, tools, and my entire freight broker sales system that allowed me to do over $200 million as a freight broker. Now I've had over 1,000 students go through that program. It's closed right now, but if you want to get on the wait list, you can check it out at freightbrokerbootcamp.com/waitlist. Okay. My Freight Broker Sales Accelerator is more of an advanced VIP type program that teaches you exactly what you need to do in order to get shippers in 2024 and beyond. So I hope that helps. Bex A asks, how do you choose a freight niche as an agent? Okay, how do you choose your niche as a freight agent? Well, you choose your niche as a freight agent the same way you choose your niche as a freight broker. Okay, I teach 4 different strategies for selecting your freight niche. You can do it by industry. Okay, the steel industry, the produce industry, the oil and gas industry, the bottled beverage industry, right? Industry specific niches. You can focus on that. You can also focus on equipment types like vans or reefers or flatbeds, right? Or you can focus on a geography. For example, Chicago outbound or now Northeast outbound or Texas outbound or Pacific Northwest outbound or California outbound, right? Those are just examples, right? You're going to focus on a geography, right? Or what I highly recommend is you do which is the 4th option, which is what I call a hybrid. You can take 2 or more of the previous examples that I gave you and you can combine them. So I'll give you a personal story, an example if you haven't heard it. When I started my freight brokerage back in 2003, we decided that the first niche we were going to pursue, Northeast outbound van freight. And it was originating in New York or PA or New Jersey up through the Northeast, all the way up through New England. If it was originating there and picking up there and it was either going west or south, that was our niche. So we combined equipment type and geography. Well, the equipment type somewhat determines what the industry is or the products that you are going to be shipping. What are some of the products that go in a dry van? Food products, bottled beverages, sometimes building supplies, consumer products, right? There's all kinds of things that go in a van. So that's an example of how we started our niche. That's an example of how any new freight broker would start their niche. And that's an example of how any freight agent would start their niche. Now, the only caveat to the freight agent might be the broker that you're working with, their carrier database, right? If they have a large carrier database of flatbed carriers, then that may be a good place to start because now you're going to have a built-in carrier database. Or if it was van or if it was whatever, right? Whatever the different types of equipment are, that might play a role in you determining if you were going to niche down into a specific equipment type. So I hope that helps. Good question. Thank you. Ben Flex, is there still any available spots to become a new freight agent? Absolutely, 100%, no question. I have, if you go to freightbrokerbootcamp.com/blog, and on that blog, you search how to get hired as a freight agent, there's an entire article and a training video that I share with you on exactly what you need to do in order to get hired as a freight agent, okay? If you follow what I teach you to do step by step by step, I have never had anybody come back to me and tell me that it didn't work. Now, the caveat is you can't do what I tell you to do one time. You got to go out and reach out to a bunch of brokerages, right? And you got to follow this process. If you go out and you do this process with 20 or 30 or 40 different brokers, right? And you follow my process to the letter, the probability of you getting hired as a freight agent is probably 98%. Okay. But I've never had anybody come back to me and say it didn't work. So go to the blog, search for how to get hired as a freight agent, follow that process, and you will get an opportunity. Okay. Hope that helps. Lisa asks, is it going to be more beneficial for me to go through email to get my first customer or try to pop in and do face-to-face? The answer is both. That's a very powerful 1-2 punch. And what I mean by that is if you send them an email, let's say you're going to go out, 20 companies you're going to go try to visit and knock on doors and try to pop into this next week. If you were to send an email out to them in advance, right, and let them know you're going to stop in, the probability of you actually getting an audience with them is going to increase because now they've got some familiarity, especially if you write a good cold email, right? Now let's flip that. Let's say, for example, you stop in to 20 companies, you should also follow up with an email. So it's not one or the other, it's both. And not only that, here's what I'm going to tell you. The advantage to email, cold email, is you can touch a lot more people. The disadvantage is the open rates and response rates are very low. Now, the advantage to being face-to-face is it's a lot harder for them to tell you no. Plus, you can leave something behind that will then get delivered to who that decision maker is, that prospect, whoever it is, the shipping manager, logistics manager, traffic manager, whoever it is. So there's pros and cons to both. And again, let's not forget about cold calling, right? Cold calling is not dead. Has it changed? Yes. Can it be hard? Yes. Can it be done? 100%. I would tell you that probably out of all the success stories that I've had through Freight Broker Bootcamp, and there have been tons of success stories of people building 6, 7, 8-figure freight brokerages, I would tell you that probably 9 out of 10 of those brokers got their first 5 or 10 customers through cold calling. And that's still true today. That's the reason why I put together the Freight Broker Sales Accelerator program, because most people think that cold calling is reading some generic bullshit script, memorizing that, and just calling hundreds of people and hoping that you get a customer. Hope, you've probably heard this before, hope is not a winning strategy. There's a better way. You need to learn to be different. You need to learn the proper way to do a cold call or a warm call or a cold email or a warm email, right? You need to learn how to use social media. Those are all the things I teach in my Freight Broker Sales Accelerator program, right? Again, I take all the best freight broker sales strategies, tactics, tools in my entire system, because that's the difference. I have a proven freight broker sales system versus someone who has some one-off script. Hey, my name's Dennis. I'm a broker. I got trucks in your area regularly. I was wondering if we can move some of your freight. Garbage, total garbage. If you never say that script in your entire life, you will be better off. I promise you. You need to figure out a way to be different. If you want to get people's attention, you got to be different. If you want to get less rejection, you got to be different. If you sound like everybody else, don't be surprised when you get the Heisman just like everybody else. Oh, Matt, does Bootcamp provide the same, if not better, training than the big box brokerages like TQL? Well, first of all, TQL doesn't teach you how to become a freight broker or how to become a freight agent. What they teach you how to do is they give you a lead list and they teach you how to make cold calls. Now, the cold call strategies that they teach are very antiquated. And what they're going to tell you when you say, well, I'm getting a lot of rejection, I'm getting hung up on, they're going to say, okay, make more calls. You need to be making 200 calls a day or 300 calls a day if you want to be successful, because their strategy sucks. They're focused on quantity over quality. Okay. Now, that company has grown, but the fact is that if you do a poll of all the carriers and all the shippers in the industry, they have a much bigger negative rating than they have a positive rating, because they have burned so many bridges because of their antiquated strategies. Okay. So I've never worked for TQL, but I will tell you a funny story. Back when I owned my brokerage, I actually wanted to better understand what TQL was doing as a business. So here's what I did. Here's how I spied on them, right? Listen carefully. You might want to use this tip sometime. So what I did was I found, I think, about 5 people that previously worked at TQL. They were no longer working there. They had worked there for a period of time. Maybe they had worked there for a year or 2 or 3 years, short term, but they had worked at TQL for a few years, most of them as in the brokerage department. And what I did was I reached out to them and I offered to pay them $50 to spend 5 minutes with me on the phone where I could ask them questions about their experience at TQL. So I got on the phone with 5 people. Those 5-minute calls, some of them turned into 10 or 15 or even 30-minute calls because they just kept talking. And what I did is I listened and I gathered all that intelligence on what they were doing, the things that they were doing right, the things they were doing wrong, the things that the people liked, the things that they didn't like. And I learned an enormous amount about one of my competitors that way. So you could use that tip if you want, but I promise you, TQL is not going to teach you how to become a freight broker, freight agent. They're going to give you a phone book and they're going to give you a phone and they're going to tell you to hustle and just get to work. Okay. So I hope that helps. L. Calloway says, can you give an example of how to sound different on a call or email, or is that Accelerator exclusive? Okay. So I'm going to give you an easy example. Okay. Let's say, for example, L. Calloway, you were one of my prospects. I saw you on my list of prospects. You work for XYZ widget company, and I'm going to do some outreach to you. I'm going to cold call you. Okay. I'm going to go to your company website. I'm going to gather some sales intelligence, recent press releases, some updated information on your products and certain things that you provide. I'm going to do a Google search about your industry and about your company. I'm going to jot down some notes. I'm going to go to LinkedIn. I'm going to look you up and your company up, and I'm going to write some notes down, some sales intelligence. Let's say during that discovery process, right, I find out that your company just acquired ABC widgets. And so that may be my sales hook. So what I might do, rather than calling you up and saying, hey, my name's Dennis, I'm a freight broker, I can save you some money on your freight, can I do some rates for you? Boring, dead, nobody wants that pitch, horrible, never say it. Or I say, oh, hey, L. Calloway, this is Dennis. I just read the article about the fact that you guys acquired ABC Logistics Company. First, I want to say congratulations. But second, I wanted to ask you a question. I know that integrating two different companies from a supply chain perspective can be really challenging. And I'm just curious, how's that impacting your business? Do you see how that's different? Do you see how he's never heard that before? Do you see how that's relevant and contextual? That's just one very simple example. I could give you hundreds of examples of how to do that. And that's a big part of what we do in the Freight Broker Sales Accelerator. Okay. We teach you how to be compelling. We teach you how to get the prospect's attention in the first 5 to 10 seconds of the call. Why? Because if you don't get their attention, then they're going to disappear. They're going to give you a smokescreen objection. Oh, we don't use brokers. Yes, they do use brokers. Oh, we're happy with our current providers. No, they're not happy with their current providers. They're just don't want to talk to you because you sound just like everybody else. Make sense? There's the link. Get on the wait list. Okay. It's sold out right now, but get on the wait list. Matt says, is 10K enough to start a freight broker business? I heard using factory companies can be a game changer for new small freight brokers. $10,000 is way more than enough. Okay. I did a survey of over 200 freight brokers a few months ago and what their startup cost was. And I'm pretty sure it was like 60% plus started their brokerage for under $5,000. And you're 100% right. Factoring is a game changer. Factoring makes a big difference. Factoring is where you can use other people's money to cash flow the payments of your carriers that are typically going to come due before you get paid by the shippers. It's kind of a unique niche type of financing program. It's a receivables financing program, basically, is what it is. So I don't want to dive into too much on the factoring, but yeah, $10,000 is more than enough. Now, some of that's going to depend upon what how much money you're spending, right? If you're going to go out and hire a bunch of people, then 10,000 probably won't be enough. But you as a solo broker or as a solo agent, $10,000 should be more than enough to cash flow you into your first few shippers to start generating some positive cash flow, and then you can build from there. So I hope that helps. All right, good questions, guys. Amazing questions. We had a lot of great questions today. Truly appreciate you guys being here. If you guys want to get the Freight Broker Startup Program, right? You're just interested in learning how to become a freight broker, freight agent from a startup perspective, go to freightbrokerbootcamp.com. Trained over 10,000 students there. If you want to learn how to get shippers, if you need a freight broker sales coach, if you want to learn the Freight Broker sales system, my proprietary sales system, go to freightbrokerbootcamp.com/waitlist. Get on the wait list. You'll be the first to get notified when new spots open up. And I look forward to seeing you guys next week. I look forward to seeing you guys inside the boot camp and the Freight Broker Sales Accelerator. Thanks for being here. Have an awesome day, and we'll see you next week.